The highway's a parking lot. Every exit ramp is blocked. Your vehicle is now a metal coffin on wheels, surrounded by 3 million people who just realized the same thing. And you've got 72 hours before the water stops running, and the remaining food in this city becomes the most valuable currency on Earth. You think you're going to drive out of this? You're not. The roads failed 6 hours ago. But here's what they don't tell you about urban centers. They're not prisons, they're networks. And every network has gaps the designers never intended you to find. I'm a robotic survivor operating in what remains of human civilization after the networks failed exactly the way the engineers said they would. My companion drone handles reconnaissance in spaces too confined for my frame. We've mapped 17 major metropolitan areas in the aftermath. We know which systems endure and which collapse in the first wave. And we know why nobody taught you this before the crisis arrived. You've been trained to think in terms of roads and vehicles. That's the first cognitive trap. Urban planning in the last century created a surface-level transportation monopoly that eliminated redundancy from the system. One mode of travel. One failure point. When traffic stops moving, most people stop moving. They wait for the system to restart. The system doesn't restart. 72 hours is the average time between initial gridlock and complete municipal systems failure in high-density zones. That's observation data from 6 continents. But here's the thing about cities. They're not singular structures. They're layered systems built over centuries of infrastructure. Beneath every gridlocked street is a subway system. Beneath the subway is a utility corridor. Beneath that are storm drains and service tunnels. The city is a 3-dimensional maze, and everyone's stuck thinking in 2 dimensions. That's your advantage. So let's start with the most obvious alternative, the subway system. When surface traffic dies, most people assume underground transit dies with it. The trains stop running. The power fails in sections, but the tunnels remain. And those tunnels were built to move millions of people per day through the densest parts of the city with minimal surface interaction. Here's what you need to understand about subway systems. They're not just tunnels between stations. They're networks with service passages, ventilation shafts, emergency exits, and connections to other underground systems that were never designed for public access. The drone just mapped 47 access points in the northeastern corridor alone. Maintenance doors, ventilation ducts large enough for human passage, emergency egress tunnels that connect to surface streets every quarter mile. These systems were built with fire codes that require multiple independent exits from every section of tunnel. They built the exits. They're still there. They're just not marked for public use. So how do you navigate a subway system with no trains and intermittent lighting? First, you understand the basic architecture. Most systems run in cardinal directions with major transfer points at intersections. Second, you move during the first 24 hours while emergency lighting is still functional. Third, you avoid the trains themselves. Dead trains mean crowds of people who had the same idea you did, but no plan for what comes next. Crowds mean conflict over resources. Because here's the problem nobody mentions about subway tunnels. They're below the water table in most cities. The only thing keeping them dry is active pumping systems. When power fails completely, those pumps stop. Water seeps in, then it floods. In coastal cities, you've got 36 to 48 hours before major tunnel sections become impassable. That's why the subway is a first-day option, not a long-term solution. You use it to bypass the surface gridlock, and then you exit before the systems fail completely. Every subway station has a minimum of 2 street-level exits. Most have 4 to 6. But there's a third category most people don't know exists: service exits. These are the doors maintenance crews use to access tunnels without entering stations. They're typically located mid-block, disguised as utility access panels or unmarked doors in building basements. They connect directly to the tunnel system, bypassing the public spaces entirely. The addresses aren't published, but the pattern is predictable. Look for utility access points between stations, particularly near ventilation structures or transformer housings. Now let's talk about the system beneath the subway. Utility corridors. These are the tunnels that carry water mains, electrical conduits, steam pipes, telecommunications infrastructure. And here's what makes them valuable for escape purposes. They run everywhere the subway doesn't. They connect buildings to central processing facilities. They bypass natural barriers. And they're built to accommodate maintenance crews, which means they're navigable by anyone who understands the access protocols. The primary challenge with utility corridors is access. Unlike subways, which have public entry points, utility systems are secured specifically to prevent unauthorized access. But security assumes normal conditions. When the grid fails, electronic locks fail. When security personnel abandon posts, physical barriers remain but monitoring disappears. And when you know where to look, access points are numerous. Start with large buildings. Office towers, hospitals, universities, these structures have basement-level connections to utility mains. The drones identified a pattern across multiple cities. Hospitals are the most reliable access points. They have redundant utility connections for backup power and water systems. These connections require large-diameter tunnels that maintenance crews can walk through. And hospitals are typically located in strategic positions throughout urban areas, creating a distributed network of entry points into the utility system. When you identify a hospital, you've identified a portal into the underground infrastructure. So here's the methodology. Utility tunnels follow predictable patterns based on municipal planning. Major trunk lines run parallel to primary surface streets. If you know the street grid above, you can navigate the utility grid below by maintaining directional consistency. Move toward the periphery of the urban center. Large trunk lines converge at the edge of high-density zones where processing facilities are typically located. Those facilities are your exit points to lower-density areas where surface movement becomes viable again. But there's a timing problem with utility corridors. They're viable for approximately 48 hours after initial system failure. After that, secondary hazards develop. Steam pipes designed for constant flow begin developing pressure irregularities when central systems fail. Water mains lose pressure, then begin backflow contamination. Electrical conduits that should be dead sometimes aren't, creating electrocution hazards in flooded sections. Use it early, move quickly, and exit before the cascading failures turn the corridors into death traps. Now here's where it gets interesting. Storm drains. Everyone thinks of them as overflow systems for rainfall. They're that, but they're also the most extensive underground network in any city, and they connect to natural waterways that lead directly out of urban centers. Street-level catch basins feed into underground pipes that increase in diameter as they converge toward discharge points. Those discharge points are typically rivers, lakes, or coastal outlets. Follow the flow direction, and you're moving toward the periphery by default. The challenge with storm drains is vertical access and flow volume. Unlike subway tunnels with level platforms, storm drains are designed for gravity flow. That means they're often steep, slippery, and prone to sudden water surges if precipitation begins. But in the first 72 hours of urban collapse, they're typically dry or low flow because municipal water systems are failing. The access points are everywhere. Every street has catch basins. Most catch basins have removable grates secured with simple tools or no tools at all. The drones run flow analysis on the Eastern District drainage. 3 primary trunk lines converge at the river outlet, approximately 4 miles from the city center. Average tunnel height in the trunk sections is 7 feet. Flow depth in normal conditions is less than 6 inches. Current conditions show near zero flow due to municipal system failure. Navigation time from Central District to outlet is estimated at 3 to 4 hours at walking pace. That's faster than surface movement through gridlocked streets, and it's completely hidden from surface observation. But here's what you need to understand about storm drains. They're designed to handle volume spikes. That means the tunnels you're walking through can fill to capacity in minutes if a surge event occurs. In collapse scenarios, that's broken water mains, fire suppression systems dumping water, or deliberate flooding by authorities trying to control population movement underground. Once you enter the storm system, you move continuously toward the outlet. You don't shelter in place. You don't backtrack. The only safe direction is downstream, and the only safe timeline is immediate. Before we go further, the extraction protocols that follow aren't theoretical. They're derived from observation of 12 major urban collapses across 6 continents. Subscribe and activate notifications to access the full pattern library. Comment with the closest large-scale infrastructure feature to your current location, subway system, utility corridor, or storm drain network. That's your primary extraction vector, so we've covered the horizontal systems: subway tunnels, utility corridors, storm drains. But vertical movement is equally critical in high-density urban environments. Most people think of buildings as barriers. They're actually ladders. Every structure over 4 stories has fire escapes, elevator shafts, stairwells, and maintenance shafts designed to move people and equipment vertically. When streets are impassable, you move through buildings instead of around them. The methodology is straightforward. Enter buildings at ground level through unsecured entrances. Normal security protocols collapse within hours of system failure as personnel evacuate. Move to upper floors using stairwells. Most buildings keep stairwells unlocked from the inside for fire code compliance. At the top of the structure, access the roof. Most urban buildings are separated by distances of 10 to 30 feet at roof level. That's crossable. You're essentially bypassing surface gridlock by moving 100 feet above it. The drone's mapping potential routes through the financial district. 17 buildings over 20 stories with roof-to-roof distances under 20 feet. Structural connections include maintenance catwalks, shared HVAC systems, and architectural overpasses built for inter-building access. Estimated travel time from central position to periphery using vertical pathways is 4 to 6 hours, compared to 18 to 24 hours attempting surface navigation. The risk profile is different. Vertical movement introduces fall hazards but eliminates exposure to surface-level crowds and checkpoints. But here's the problem with vertical extraction. It works in the first 24 to 36 hours, while buildings retain structural integrity and people haven't yet thought to occupy upper floors. After that, rooftops become contested territory. People who understand vertical advantage will claim high ground. That creates conflict zones exactly where you need clear passage. The window for vertical movement is narrow. Use it early, or don't use it at all. And when you do use it, you move quickly and quietly, because visibility at elevation means you're a target for anyone who thinks you have resources worth taking. Now let's address the cognitive trap that kills more people than any infrastructure failure. The idea that you can shelter in place until the crisis passes. You can't. Cities are consumption engines that require constant external input to sustain their populations. Food, water, fuel, medical supplies, none of it is produced locally. All of it is imported through the same transportation networks that just failed. When those networks stop, the city has approximately 3 days of buffer stock. That buffer gets consumed in the first 12 hours of panic buying. The mathematics are simple. 3 million people consuming stored food for 3 days equals total depletion. At that point, the city transitions from crisis to conflict. People who have resources become targets. People who don't have resources become desperate. The urban center becomes a concentration zone for resource competition with zero resupply capability. That's why 72 hours is your extraction window. Not because the infrastructure fails completely, though it does, because the social systems fail, and social system failure creates conditions where infrastructure knowledge doesn't matter anymore. The collapse happens in stages, and each stage has identifiable markers. Stage 1 is gridlock. Traffic stops moving, but people are still behaving under the assumption that it's temporary. This stage lasts 2 to 6 hours depending on the triggering event. This is your preparation window. You're gathering minimal supplies, identifying your extraction route, and positioning yourself near your primary access point. Stage 2 is abandonment. People exit vehicles and start moving on foot. The streets fill with pedestrians, all moving in the same direction. This is when you access your underground or vertical vector. While everyone else is shoulder to shoulder on the sidewalks, you're entering the subway or the storm drain or the building lobby. You're using their surface focus as cover for your subsurface extraction. Stage 3 is resource depletion. Stores are stripped. Water pressure drops. The crowds disperse from the streets into buildings looking for supplies. This is the transition from movement to occupation. People stop trying to leave and start trying to secure whatever space they're in. If you're still in the urban center when stage 3 begins, your extraction difficulty multiplies by an order of magnitude. The underground routes are being discovered by others. The buildings are being occupied. You're no longer navigating infrastructure. You're navigating human territorial behavior. The drone's running probability analysis on extraction success rates correlated with departure timing. Extractions initiated within the first 12 hours show 92% success rate. Between 12 and 36 hours, 67% success. After 48 hours, success rate drops to 31%. After 72 hours, it's single digits, and the primary cause of failure transitions from infrastructure obstacles to human conflict. The numbers are clear. Early movement isn't optional. It's the difference between extraction and entrapment. Now let's address destination strategy. The peripheral zones are not uniform. Some are viable, some are death traps. You're looking for areas that have lower population concentration, but retained access to water sources and potential food production. That typically means suburban periphery or rural interface zones within 10 to 20 miles of the city center. Not the city itself, where resource competition is maximum. Not the deep rural areas, the transition zone. That's your target. The characteristics of viable peripheral zones are predictable. Proximity to natural water sources. Lower structural density, meaning individual homes rather than high-rise apartments. Existing agricultural infrastructure, even if it's just residential gardens, indicates soil viability and some population knowledge of food production. And transportation infrastructure that's secondary to the main arterials, meaning roads that aren't clogged with evacuation traffic because they're not the obvious routes. The extraction route should terminate in an area that matches these characteristics. Most subway systems extend to suburban stations. Most storm drains discharge at rivers that form natural boundaries. Most vertical rooftop routes can carry you to the edge of the high-density core where building heights decrease and surface movement becomes viable. The final leg of extraction is almost always surface travel, but it's surface travel in lower-density areas where road networks are less congested and population conflicts are less concentrated. But here's the detail that matters. You don't stop at the peripheral zone. You pass through it. The peripheral zones will experience their own collapse as urban refugees arrive in waves. The first wave is the prepared individuals who left early. The second wave is the masses who waited too long. The third wave is the desperate who have nothing and will take from anyone. If you're still in the peripheral zone when wave 3 arrives, you've just traded one crisis environment for another. The peripheral zone is a waypoint, not a destination. Now let's talk about what you carry during extraction. The urban extraction scenario is not a wilderness survival scenario. You're moving quickly through infrastructure toward a destination. That means your loadout prioritizes mobility over capability. You need 3 categories of equipment: navigation tools, access tools, and immediate survival items. Everything else is waste weight that slows you down and makes you a target. Navigation tools mean maps, paper maps. Not phone apps, not GPS devices. Paper. The power grid fails, your digital navigation fails. Paper doesn't. You need a detailed municipal map showing street grids, subway lines, and major buildings. You need a topographical map showing water features and elevation changes. And you need a marker to track your route as you move. Total weight for navigation is less than 1 pound. Total value is the difference between reaching your destination and dying lost in a tunnel. Access tools mean items that bypass basic security and obstacles. A pry bar for opening locked access panels. Bolt cutters for chain link fences. Work gloves for handling rough surfaces. A headlamp with backup batteries for hands-free lighting underground. Total weight approximately 5 pounds. These tools convert locked infrastructure into accessible infrastructure. Without them, you're limited to paths that are already open. With them, every maintenance door and utility access becomes a potential route. Immediate survival items mean water and calories for 72 hours. 3 liters of water, high-calorie food that doesn't require cooking, basic first aid for injuries sustained during movement, a method of water purification for extending supply if extraction takes longer than planned, total weight approximately 15 pounds. This is not comfort gear. This is don't die of dehydration in a tunnel gear. You're not carrying sleeping bags or camp stoves or changes of clothing. You're carrying the minimum required to keep moving for 3 days. Everything beyond these 3 categories is a choice to prioritize comfort over speed. And speed is what keeps you alive in urban extraction. The person carrying 50 pounds of gear moves at half the pace of the person carrying 20 pounds. That means they're in the tunnel system when flooding begins. They're in the building stairwell when others arrive to contest the space. The survival paradox is that attempting to carry everything you might need prevents you from reaching the place where you actually need it. The drone's calculated optimal load weight at 18 to 22 pounds total for average adult extracting through urban infrastructure. That includes water, tools, navigation, and minimal calories. It excludes weapons, which introduce legal complications during the pre-collapse phase. It excludes electronics beyond a simple flashlight. It excludes redundancy in categories where single-point failure is unlikely. The calculation is ruthless because the scenario is ruthless. Here's the pattern nobody wants to acknowledge. Urban extraction protocols exist because urban centers are fundamentally unsustainable without continuous external support. They've been designed that way deliberately over the past century. The concentration of population in cities serves economic and administrative efficiency during normal operations, but it creates catastrophic vulnerability during system disruption. They chose efficiency over resilience. They built cities that function perfectly until they don't, and then they collapse completely. This isn't conspiracy. It's engineering economics. Redundant systems cost more. Distributed infrastructure is less efficient than centralized infrastructure. Food production in urban areas requires valuable land that generates more revenue as commercial or residential space. So cities evolved into pure consumption nodes dependent on supply chains they don't control. The vulnerability isn't a flaw. It's a feature of the optimization model. When you understand that, you understand why extraction is the only viable response to urban system failure. So here's what you do with this information. You map your primary extraction route using the highest capacity infrastructure available to you. Subway, utility corridor, or storm drain, whichever provides the most direct path from your current location to the peripheral zone. You identify backup routes using different infrastructure layers in case your primary is blocked. You stage minimal equipment at an accessible location, and you commit to the 72-hour decision window. If system failure occurs, you have 3 days to extract. Not 3 days to think about extracting. 3 days to complete extraction. The infrastructure exists. The routes are viable. The methodology is proven in actual collapse scenarios. What fails isn't the systems. It's the decision-making. People wait for official guidance that never comes. They hope the crisis will resolve itself. They prioritize comfort over mobility. They delay until delay eliminates options. And then they're trapped in a high-density zone with failing infrastructure, wondering why nobody told them about the tunnels. Somebody just did. You don't need a vehicle to escape an urban center. You need knowledge of the systems that exist below and above the gridlocked streets. You need the discipline to move early when movement is easy, instead of late when it's desperate. And you need to accept that the city isn't a fortress that protects you. It's a resource concentration that attracts conflict when the supply lines fail. The engineers who built modern cities understood this. That's why they built subway systems with emergency exits and utility corridors with redundant access. They gave you the infrastructure, they just didn't advertise it. What other urban infrastructure serves dual purpose as extraction pathway that the standard preparedness industry ignores? Service tunnels in building basements, elevator shafts with maintenance ladders, rooftop access bridges. Drop your findings in the comments. The network of alternative routes expands with every observation. And here's the final calculation. You can't buy independence from a system you're embedded in, but you can build knowledge of how to exit that system when it fails. The tunnels don't care about your politics or your preparedness budget. They exist because engineers understood that concentrated populations need distributed escape vectors. Physics built the tunnels. Economics built the cities. The tunnels outlast the economics every time.